Before the rise of Islam, the Arabian Peninsula was a land of harsh deserts, fertile oases, and bustling trade routes connecting Yemen, Mecca, and Syria. Society was tribal, each clan fiercely independent, bound by custom and blood, and often engaged in conflict. Polytheism dominated religious life. The Kaaba housed hundreds of idols worshipped by the Quraysh, the tribe that controlled Mecca's wealth and trade. Yet Arabia was not without sophistication. Trade caravans connected cities across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. Poetry and oral tradition flourished, preserving tribal histories and cultural identity. Within this volatile mix of commerce, culture, and tribal rivalry, the stage was set for a new force to emerge, an idea that would unite a fractured land under a single faith. In the arid expanse of the Arabian Peninsula, a tapestry of human existence unfolded long before the advent of Islam. This land, seemingly inhospitable, cradled a civilization marked by its complexity and contradictions. The pre-Islamic Arabs, known as the Jahiliyyah, inhabited a world where survival hinged on the harsh realities of desert life. Nomadic Bedouins traversed the vast stretches of sand, their existence defined by the rhythms of the seasons and the scarcity of water. These tribes, bound by kinship and honor, adhered to a code that emphasized loyalty, bravery, and hospitality. In stark contrast, the settled communities flourished in the fertile oases and coastal cities. Mecca, nestled in the Hijaz region, emerged as a pivotal center of trade and pilgrimage. Its strategic location along the incense route facilitated commerce between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. The Kaaba, a cube-shaped structure at its heart, attracted pilgrims from various tribes, each bringing their deities and rituals. Religiously, the Arabian landscape was a mosaic of beliefs. Polytheism predominated, with each tribe venerating its own pantheon of gods. The Kaaba housed numerous idols, representing a multitude of deities worshipped by the Quraysh and other tribes. Yet, beneath this polytheistic veneer, traces of monotheistic traditions persisted. Judaism had taken root in the southern regions, particularly in Yathrib, later Medina, where Jewish tribes like Banu Qurayza and Banu Nadir resided. These communities maintained their religious practices and engaged in trade, contributing to the region's economic and cultural fabric. Christianity, too, found its way into Arabia. The Ghassanids, an Arab Christian kingdom allied with the Byzantine Empire, held sway over parts of the northern territories. In the south, the Himyarite kingdom in Yemen experienced a Christian influence, especially after King Diju Nuwas' conversion to Christianity in the 6th century. Despite the presence of these monotheistic faiths, the majority of Arabs adhered to their ancestral polytheistic beliefs. The Kaaba, with its idols and rituals, stood as a testament to this enduring tradition. Culturally, the Arabs of this era placed immense value on poetry and oral traditions. The Bedouins composed verses that celebrated their lineage, victories, and the harsh beauty of the desert. These poems were passed down through generations, preserving the history and values of the tribes. Socially, the Arabian society was structured around tribal affiliations. The concept of honor was paramount, and disputes were often settled through combat or negotiation. The tribe provided protection and identity, and loyalty to one's kin was sacred. Economically, the Arabs engaged in trade, agriculture, and pastoralism. The caravans that traversed the desert carried goods such as spices, textiles, and precious metals. Mecca, with its bustling markets, became a hub for merchants and pilgrims alike. Politically, the Arabian Peninsula lacked a centralized authority. Power was decentralized, with each tribe governing its own affairs. The Quraysh, however, held significant influence due to their control over Mecca and the Kaaba. In this milieu of religious diversity, cultural richness, and social complexity, the stage was set for a transformative shift. The arrival of a new faith, one that would challenge existing norms and unite disparate tribes under a single banner, was imminent. The rise of Islam would not only alter the spiritual landscape, but also redefine the political and social structures of the Arabian Peninsula. It would usher in an era where the concepts of community and governance would be reimagined, leaving an indelible mark on history. Thus, Arabia before Islam was a land of contrasts, where tradition and change, belief and skepticism, unity and division coexisted. It was a society on the cusp of transformation, awaiting the arrival of a new force that would reshape its destiny. In the year 610 CE, in the rugged mountains surrounding Mecca, a man named Muhammad, a member of the respected Quraysh tribe, began retreating from the bustling city into the solitude of the cave of Hira. The Quraysh of Mecca, despite their wealth and control of the Kaaba, were enmeshed in a society defined by tribal rivalries, commercial competition, and religious devotion to an array of idols. Muhammad, who had long been known for his contemplative nature and moral integrity, sought to distance himself from the inequities, injustices, and spiritual confusion of his society. He had witnessed the cruelty of tribal vendettas, the exploitation of the poor by the elite, and the dominance of materialism over morality, and these observations weighed heavily upon him. It was in this climate of reflection, isolation, and spiritual longing that a force would arrive that would change the course of human history. During one of these meditative retreats, the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, delivering a revelation that would mark the beginning of a transformative spiritual journey. This encounter, which became known as the first revelation, commanded him to recite, in the name of God, Allah, affirming the existence of a single, omnipotent deity. This was no ordinary message. It was a declaration that challenged the polytheistic norms of Meccan society, confronted deeply entrenched tribal loyalties, and proposed a radical moral and social order founded on monotheism, justice, and accountability. The revelation emphasized the oneness of God, the importance of ethical behavior, and the ultimate responsibility of humanity before a divine authority. Muhammad's initial response was one of fear and uncertainty. The enormity of the message and the weight of his mission were daunting. He confided in his wife Khadija, a woman of wealth, intellect, and remarkable insight, who became his first supporter. Khadija's cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, a Christian scholar well-versed in the scriptures of Judaism and Christianity, confirmed that Muhammad's experiences aligned with the prophetic tradition, providing reassurance that his revelations were divinely inspired. Encouraged, Muhammad began sharing his message with close family and friends. The earliest converts included Khadija, Muhammad's cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, a youth from his own household, and Abu Bakr, a respected merchant known for his integrity and commitment to justice. Slowly, a small community began to form around the principles of faith in one God, moral responsibility, and social reform. Yet this community, although devoted and sincere, faced immense challenges. The Quraysh elite, whose economic power and social authority depended upon the polytheistic framework of Mecca, perceived Muhammad's teachings as an existential threat. The Kaaba was central to their wealth and influence, drawing pilgrims who paid offerings and participated in rituals that reinforced the authority of the Quraysh. Any challenge to polytheism, therefore, was also a challenge to their power, prestige, and economic advantage. By approximately 613 CE, the Quraysh had begun to actively oppose Muhammad and his followers. Their resistance took many forms: verbal attacks, social ostracism, and threats of violence. Muslims were marginalized from trade, excluded from social gatherings, and often publicly humiliated. Families who embraced Islam faced internal strife as some members feared retaliation or loss of status. The Quraysh leadership, including figures such as Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl, became symbolic adversaries of the nascent Muslim community, representing the entrenched power structures that Muhammad's revelations sought to confront. Despite persecution, the early Muslim community persisted, united by faith and a shared vision of a society governed by justice, equality, and devotion to one God. Converts were drawn not only to the spiritual message but also to its social implications. The call to support the poor, to reject the corruption of the elite, and to embrace a moral code that transcended tribal divisions. This appeal to both spirituality and social ethics was crucial in a society where wealth, birth, and clan often dictated privilege and power. The Muslims' growing visibility in Mecca, however, intensified tensions. By 615 CE, the Quraysh attempted to suppress the movement through formal social and economic boycotts. Muhammad's followers were barred from markets, denied protection by allied tribes, and forced into extreme hardship. Families faced starvation, trade caravans were denied passage, and converts were confined to segregated areas outside the city. This period of persecution, which lasted approximately 3 years, tested the resilience and cohesion of the early Muslim community. Within this crucible of adversity, the principles of faith, patience, and solidarity were forged, creating a foundation that would endure far beyond the city of Mecca. Muhammad himself became a central figure not only in spiritual guidance, but in social arbitration and leadership. His revelations increasingly emphasized ethical conduct, the rights of the marginalized, and accountability before God. Surah after surah in the Quran addressed issues of justice, charity, family responsibilities, and the treatment of neighbors and strangers. These teachings directly challenged the status quo in Mecca, where tribal customs often allowed the powerful to exploit the weak. The spiritual message was inseparable from its social implications, creating a tension between the Quraysh elite and the rapidly growing Muslim minority. The situation escalated in 616 CE when some Muslims sought refuge in the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia under the protection of King Megas. This migration, later known as the First Hijra, exemplified the determination of the Muslim community to preserve their faith in the face of oppression. It also demonstrated Muhammad's strategic acumen and the emerging network of alliances that would later prove essential in the survival and expansion of Islam. By 617 CE, the Quraysh's hostility had become more organized and systematic. Public denouncement, economic sanctions, and threats of violence created an atmosphere of fear. Converts like Abu Bakr risked their lives and fortunes, while Muhammad himself faced the constant threat of assassination. Yet even in the face of adversity, Islam's principles attracted followers from various strata of Meccan society, including artisans, traders, and even individuals connected to the Quraysh elite who were inspired by the moral integrity and spiritual depth of Muhammad's message. Around 618 CE, Muslims began to gather in secret, holding meetings in homes and secluded areas outside the city. This period saw the first development of a sense of community, or ummah, transcending tribal affiliations. The notion that faith in Allah could unite people across traditional divisions marked a profound shift in social organization. Unlike the rigid structures of tribal loyalty, the ummah offered inclusion based on belief and conduct, emphasizing moral equality and collective responsibility. By 619 CE, Muhammad faced profound personal losses that tested his resolve. The death of his wife Khadija, his primary supporter and confidant, left him bereft, and the passing of his uncle Abu Talib, the protector who had shielded him from Quraysh's hostility, removed a key political and social safeguard. These events, known collectively as the Year of Sorrow, underscored the perilous environment in which the early Muslim community existed. Yet they also catalyzed the deeper consolidation of faith and the realization that survival depended upon divine guidance and steadfast commitment. During this period, the Quran's revelations increasingly addressed the broader societal implications of Islam. Passages emphasize the importance of social justice, compassion toward orphans and the poor, and the rejection of exploitation. Muhammad's teachings called for ethical behavior, personal accountability, and the cultivation of a moral society, challenging both tribal customs and economic hierarchies. The Quraysh's perception of Islam as a threat intensified as these principles directly undermined their control over Meccan society, particularly regarding wealth distribution and social influence. By 620 CE, the concept of migration, or Hijra, began to emerge as a strategic necessity. While the primary goal was spiritual preservation, it also represented a pragmatic response to escalating hostility. Muhammad sought alliances beyond Mecca, reaching out to sympathetic tribes and communities, including those in Yathrib, later Medina, who were experiencing their own internal tensions and would later provide refuge and a foundation for the first Islamic state. By 622 CE, the tension between the Quraysh and the Muslim community had reached a critical point. Plots against Muhammad's life forced him and his followers to take decisive action. The migration to Medina, known as the Hijra, was both a physical escape and a strategic step toward establishing a society where Islam could flourish without the constant threat of persecution. It marked the culmination of 12 years of struggle, during which faith, community, and resilience had been tested to their limits. The period between 610 and 622 CE, therefore, was formative not only in defining Muhammad's prophetic mission, but also in shaping the social and political dimensions of Islam. It was a time when faith became inseparable from communal identity, when spiritual guidance intersected with social ethics, and when a small persecuted minority began to lay the foundation for a civilization that would extend far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The revelations, hardships, migrations, and strategic alliances of this era were critical in transforming Islam from a private spiritual message into a cohesive movement capable of challenging established power structures and reshaping history itself. By the year 622 CE, the Muslim community in Mecca had endured over a decade of relentless persecution. The Quraysh, feeling threatened by the growing influence of Muhammad and the principles he espoused, had intensified their measures to suppress the fledgling faith. Assassination plots, economic sanctions, social ostracism, and public humiliation had rendered the survival of the early Muslims precarious. In this climate of hostility, Muhammad recognized that the continuation of Islam as a spiritual and social force depended upon a decisive relocation, a migration that would become known as the Hijra. The Hijra was not merely an act of self-preservation. It was a foundational event that would transform Islam from a persecuted minority religion into a structured socio-political entity capable of governing and uniting diverse tribes under a single divinely inspired vision. The destination of this migration was the city of Yathrib, later known as Medina. Located approximately 320 kilometers north of Mecca, Medina was strategically situated on fertile lands with access to trade routes linking the Arabian interior to northern and southern regions. It was a city of mixed populations, including Arab tribes such as the Aws and Khazraj, who had long been engaged in internecine conflict. Additionally, Jewish tribes such as Banu Qurayza, Banu Nadir, and Banu Kinuka resided within Medina, bringing with them agricultural expertise, literacy, and legal traditions. Muhammad's reputation as a wise mediator and spiritual authority had preceded him, and the city's leaders saw in him an opportunity to resolve their ongoing disputes while introducing a unifying moral and social framework. The Hijra itself was a meticulously planned and perilous endeavor. Muhammad and his followers had to elude Quraysh spies and navigate the treacherous desert terrain without falling prey to assassination or tribal retaliation. Early on, Muhammad designated trusted companions to escort and protect various groups of migrants. Among them was Abu Bakr, who became his closest confidant and companion during the journey. Their route took them through uninhabited areas, mountainous passes, and valleys, requiring both physical endurance and strategic caution. The journey, while arduous, was marked by extraordinary acts of faith and solidarity. The migrants relied upon each other, shared scarce resources, and maintained strict secrecy to ensure the survival of the group. Upon arrival in Yathrib, Muhammad was greeted with a mix of enthusiasm and cautious optimism. The city's leaders and tribes recognized the potential for social cohesion that Muhammad offered, especially in a society fragmented by long-standing rivalries and cycles of retribution. To formalize the integration of diverse groups, Muhammad introduced the Constitution of Medina, a pioneering document in both religious and political history. Drafted in consultation with tribal leaders and key figures from Jewish communities, the Constitution established Medina as a pluralistic society united under shared principles of governance, justice, and collective security. The Constitution of Medina was remarkable in its scope and vision. It recognized the autonomy of each tribe while establishing overarching obligations to the community, or Ummah, as a whole. Religious freedom was guaranteed, allowing Jewish and pagan communities to maintain their faiths while cooperating in matters of defense and civic responsibility. The document outlined rights and duties, including mutual protection against external threats, equitable distribution of resources in times of scarcity, and adherence to ethical standards in trade and dispute resolution. For the first time in Arabian history, a written agreement sought to reconcile spiritual principles with practical governance, demonstrating that Islam's vision extended beyond personal faith to encompass social order and political legitimacy. The establishment of the Muslim community in Medina also introduced a novel social structure. Converts from Mecca, known as Muhajirin, were integrated with the local tribes, called Ansar, who offered protection, housing, and resources. Muhammad emphasized solidarity between these groups, fostering a sense of unity that transcended tribal lineage and prior conflicts. The Ansar shared their homes and wealth with the migrants, creating a network of support that allowed the Muslim community to stabilize and grow. Marriages, alliances, and collaborative efforts further strengthened the bonds between the Muhajirin and Ansar, setting a precedent for communal responsibility and interdependence in Islamic society. Economically, the relocation to Medina allowed the Muslim community to establish sustainable means of livelihood. Agriculture thrived in the fertile region, and trade with neighboring towns provided necessary goods and resources. The creation of communal systems for the distribution of wealth, particularly to support the poor and needy, became an integral aspect of governance, reflecting the Quranic principles of social justice and equity. This model of resource management was revolutionary in a society previously defined by tribal hierarchies and competitive accumulation of wealth. Politically, Muhammad's role expanded beyond spiritual leadership to encompass judicial, legislative, and military responsibilities. Disputes were settled based on ethical guidance from the Revelations, informed by consultation with tribal leaders and elders. This approach fostered legitimacy, as decisions balanced divine principles with practical realities. The Medina period thus marked the first experiment in Islam as a governing system, integrating religious, social, and political dimensions into a coherent framework capable of uniting a fractured society. The Constitution also delineated the rights of minority communities, particularly the Jewish tribes, who were acknowledged as part of the Ummah while retaining their religious autonomy. In exchange, they contributed to the collective defense and adhered to agreements regarding trade and civic conduct. This arrangement was unprecedented in the region and reflected Muhammad's pragmatic understanding of governance. Religious identity could coexist with shared civic responsibilities, and social cohesion depended upon mutual respect, cooperation, and the enforcement of ethical norms. Despite the promise of Medina, challenges persisted. Tensions among the Aws and Khazraj tribes, the potential for Quraysh retaliation, and disputes with Jewish tribes over allegiance and resources tested Muhammad's leadership. Yet, these challenges became opportunities to implement and refine the principles of Islamic governance. Strategic marriages, mediation in conflicts, and the establishment of community rituals and practices fostered cohesion and loyalty. The Friday prayer, Jumu'ah, was institutionalized as a unifying spiritual practice, while zakat, almsgiving, became a central component of communal welfare, reinforcing ethical responsibility and social equity. The period following the Hijra also witnessed the early development of the Muslim military. While primarily focused on self-defense, the community had to contend with Quraysh aggression and raids along trade routes. Muhammad's leadership combined religious motivation with strategic acumen, ensuring the survival of the community while maintaining the moral high ground. Treaties, negotiations, and measured responses to conflict established precedents for conduct in warfare, emphasizing ethics, protection of non-combatants, and restraint. These practices demonstrated that Islam's principles could guide not only individual behavior, but also collective action in complex social and political contexts. Within the spiritual sphere, revelations continued to shape the community's identity. Emphasis was placed on monotheism, moral rectitude, and social justice, reinforcing the ethical foundation of the state. The integration of religious observance with civic responsibility created a distinctive model in which faith and governance were inseparable. This framework allowed the Muslim community to survive, grow, and thrive in the hostile environment surrounding Medina, laying the groundwork for future expansion and consolidation across the Arabian Peninsula. The Hijra also marked a shift in the conceptualization of the Ummah. No longer confined to Mecca, the community was defined by shared belief rather than lineage or geography. Converts from Medina, migrants from Mecca, and allied tribes were united under a collective identity that transcended traditional divisions. This inclusive model of community was revolutionary, challenging entrenched tribal hierarchies and providing a blueprint for a society governed by ethical and spiritual principles rather than mere kinship or wealth. By the end of 622 CE, the foundations of the Islamic State in Medina were firmly established. The Constitution provided governance, social cohesion, and mechanisms for conflict resolution. The Muhajirin and Ansar were integrated into a resilient and cooperative community. The Muslim army, though modest, was trained and organized. Ethical and spiritual principles guided both personal conduct and collective action. The stage was set for subsequent events: the defense of the community, consolidation of influence, and eventual unification of Arabia under the banner of Islam. In retrospect, the Hijra was far more than a migration. It was a transformative event that codified the principles of Islamic society. It demonstrated the interplay between faith, governance, and social cohesion, illustrating that religion could serve as a unifying force capable of bridging divisions, establishing justice, and guiding collective action. The lessons of this period would resonate throughout Islamic history, influencing law, governance, military strategy, and the moral fabric of communities for centuries to come. The narrative of 622 CE stands as a testament to the foresight, resilience, and strategic genius of Muhammad and his followers. It reflects a society in transition, one where divine guidance met practical governance, where faith was inseparable from community, and where the foundations of a civilization capable of spanning continents were laid, brick by brick, principle by principle, and revelation by revelation. Following the establishment of the Muslim community in Medina, the nascent Islamic State faced both external threats and internal challenges. The Quraysh of Mecca, alarmed by Muhammad's growing influence and the stability he had created in Medina, viewed the Muslim community as a threat to their economic dominance and social authority. Trade caravans that had long traversed the Arabian Peninsula became points of strategic importance, as both Mecca and Medina sought to assert control and influence over these vital economic arteries. It was within this volatile environment that the Muslim community would confront some of its earliest and most defining military and political tests, setting the stage for the eventual unification of Arabia under Islam. The first significant confrontation occurred in 624 CE at the Battle of Badr, a momentous event that would resonate across Islamic history. The Quraysh, confident in their numerical superiority and experience in warfare, dispatched a caravan under the protection of a contingent of armed men. Muhammad, acting on intelligence and guided by his strategic acumen, mobilized a small force of approximately 313 men, many of whom were poorly armed. The victory at Badr had profound consequences. It emboldened the Muslim community, consolidated Muhammad's authority, and demonstrated that the principles of Islam could underpin both spiritual and military endeavors. The Quraysh, shocked by the defeat, recognized the growing power of the Muslim state, but they were not yet willing to concede. The loss intensified their resolve to suppress Islam, setting the stage for continued conflict and a protracted struggle over the future of Arabia. In 625 CE, the Quraysh regrouped and sought to avenge their losses at Badr, leading to the Battle of Uhud. This confrontation, near the slopes of Mount Uhud outside Medina, illustrated both the potential and the vulnerabilities of the early Muslim community. Muhammad's forces initially held the advantage, but a contingent of archers disobeyed his orders to maintain their positions on strategic hills, allowing the Quraysh cavalry to flank and rout the Muslim army. Despite the setback, the battle reinforced crucial lessons about discipline, obedience, and the importance of unity in leadership. Muhammad himself was injured, and several companions were killed, yet the Muslim community endured, demonstrating resilience that would become a hallmark of the faith. The period following Uhud was marked by continued tension, diplomacy, and strategic preparation. Muhammad recognized that outright confrontation with the Quraysh required not only courage but also ingenuity. This understanding led to one of the most remarkable examples of defensive warfare in early Islamic history, the Battle of the Trench in 627 CE. Anticipating a siege by a confederation of Meccan forces and allied tribes, Muhammad proposed digging a trench around Medina, a tactic previously unknown in Arabian warfare. The trench, approximately 3 meters wide and strategically positioned, effectively neutralized the enemy's cavalry and prevented the city from being overrun. The Quraysh and their allies, unable to breach the defenses and demoralized by harsh weather and logistical difficulties, ultimately withdrew. The successful defense of Medina through strategic innovation highlighted Muhammad's adaptability and reinforced the community's confidence in both divine guidance and human ingenuity. In addition to military engagements, this period witnessed the consolidation of internal governance and social cohesion. Muhammad worked diligently to integrate the diverse populations of Medina, including the Ansar, Muhajirin, and Jewish tribes, under shared ethical and legal frameworks. Regular assemblies, judicial decisions, and communal rituals reinforced loyalty and collective identity, ensuring that the Muslim state remained resilient despite external pressures. The Quran emphasized both spiritual guidance and practical conduct, instructing the community on matters of warfare, justice, and mutual responsibility, creating a comprehensive system in which faith, law, and social order were inextricably linked. The year 628 CE marked a turning point with the signing of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Muhammad sought to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey of profound spiritual significance. The Quraysh, wary of a potential confrontation, initially denied passage. After negotiations, both sides agreed to a truce, establishing conditions for peaceful coexistence and outlining terms for political engagement. The treaty, though seemingly unfavorable to Muslims at first glance, provided a strategic opportunity. It allowed the Muslim community to consolidate power, engage in diplomacy, and expand influence without immediate threat from Mecca. Tribes began to recognize the Muslims as a legitimate and stabilizing force, and conversions to Islam increased as the faith's principles became more widely known. By 630 CE, the truce was violated by Quraysh's allies, providing Muhammad with a legitimate cause to lead a large force toward Mecca. The peaceful conquest of Mecca stands as a defining moment in the rise of Islam. Muhammad's approach combined strategic brilliance with remarkable clemency. The city was taken with minimal bloodshed, the Kaaba was cleansed of idols, and key figures, including former opponents, were offered amnesty. This event not only marked the end of Quraysh's dominance, but also demonstrated that Islam could achieve political and religious unity through both moral authority and strategic action. The reconciliation of former adversaries facilitated the integration of Mecca into the Muslim state and set a precedent for the ethical conduct of conquest. Following the conquest, Islam rapidly extended its influence across the Arabian Peninsula. Tribal alliances were forged, and the principles established in Medina were applied to newly integrated communities. Muhammad sent letters to regional rulers, inviting them to embrace Islam while emphasizing justice, moral conduct, and mutual respect. These efforts resulted in widespread conversion and the unification of tribes that had previously engaged in centuries of conflict. By the time of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Arabia had transformed from a patchwork of fractious tribes into a cohesive community, unified under a common religious, legal, and social framework. Throughout this period, the interplay between military engagement, diplomacy, and social reform exemplified the comprehensive nature of Islamic governance. The early Muslim community demonstrated that spiritual authority could coexist with political leadership, and that ethical principles could guide both personal conduct and statecraft. The battles of Badr, Uhud, and the Trench were not merely martial encounters. They were crucibles that tested faith, resilience, and strategy, shaping the identity of a community that would soon extend its influence far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Micro-nuances during these years illustrate the sophistication of the early Muslim state. Trade routes were carefully monitored to ensure economic stability, alliances with neutral or sympathetic tribes were cultivated, and social welfare mechanisms, such as the distribution of zakat and support for widows and orphans, were implemented to strengthen cohesion. Ethical guidelines dictated conduct during warfare, emphasizing the protection of non-combatants and property. This approach differentiated the Muslim community from the often brutal and retaliatory practices common in pre-Islamic Arabian conflicts, reinforcing the moral and spiritual legitimacy of their leadership. The period from 624 to 632 CE also set precedents in religious observance, civic responsibility, and legal development. Rituals such as communal prayer, fasting, and pilgrimage were institutionalized, reinforcing both spiritual identity and social cohesion. The integration of ethical principles into governance ensured that leadership was accountable, disputes were adjudicated fairly, and the rights of marginalized groups were recognized. These innovations laid the groundwork for a civilization in which faith, law, and society were deeply intertwined. By the end of this decade, the Arabian Peninsula had undergone a remarkable transformation. The scattered tribes, long defined by internecine rivalry and localized customs, had been united under the principles of Islam. Mecca, once a center of pagan worship and Quraysh dominance, had become a focal point of the Muslim community. Medina, initially a refuge, had become the administrative and spiritual heart of the emerging state. The early Muslim community had demonstrated resilience, strategic acumen, and ethical governance, providing a model for both future conquests and internal consolidation. The consolidation of Arabia was not merely a military or political achievement. It was a comprehensive social revolution. Tribal allegiances were transformed into a broader sense of community. Ethical principles guided both personal and collective conduct, and spiritual devotion provided the cohesion necessary to sustain rapid societal change. By integrating religious, legal, and social systems, the early Muslim state achieved what few societies had accomplished: the unification of a fragmented region under a shared vision, combining moral authority with political legitimacy. The final years leading up to 632 CE were marked by continued efforts to stabilize and unify the Arabian Peninsula. Muhammad dispatched emissaries to neighboring tribes, established administrative structures, and reinforced the moral and ethical principles that had guided the community from Medina to Mecca. The culmination of these efforts was a society that, in less than a decade, had moved from a persecuted minority to a unified state capable of sustaining governance, social cohesion, and ethical order. This period of consolidation laid the foundation for the expansion of Islam beyond Arabia, setting the stage for the subsequent Rashidun Caliphate and the transformation of the region into a major cultural, political, and spiritual force. The death of Muhammad in 632 CE left the Muslim community at a critical juncture. The man who had unified Arabia through a combination of spiritual authority, ethical governance, and strategic leadership was gone, leaving a leadership vacuum that threatened to unravel the fragile unity of the newly consolidated Arabian Peninsula. Yet, from this challenge arose the institution of the Caliphate, a system that would preserve the unity of the Ummah, guide the community through internal and external crises, and lay the foundation for Islam's expansion beyond Arabia. Abu Bakr, a close companion and early convert, was selected as the first caliph, becoming the political and spiritual successor to Muhammad. His leadership marked the beginning of the Rashidun Caliphate, a period characterized by rapid consolidation, expansion, and profound transformation. Almost immediately after his appointment, Abu Bakr confronted a series of rebellions collectively known as the Ridda Wars. Numerous tribes across Arabia, having embraced Islam under Muhammad, attempted to renounce the faith upon his death. Some refused to pay zakat, the obligatory alms central to the Islamic social and economic system, while others openly rebelled, seizing territories and asserting autonomy. These revolts threatened the unity of the Ummah and the legitimacy of the Caliphate. Abu Bakr's decisive response combined military action, negotiation, and moral authority. He asserted that Islam was not merely a personal belief, but a covenant binding the Ummah together, and that rebellion against the Caliphate was a threat not only to political stability, but to the religious and ethical order established by Muhammad. By 633 CE, through campaigns across Central and Eastern Arabia, Abu Bakr had reasserted control, bringing the tribes back into the fold and restoring the nascent Islamic state's cohesion. Following internal consolidation, the Rashidun Caliphate embarked on a remarkable period of expansion. Under Abu Bakr and his successor, Umar ibn al-Khattab, r. 634 to 644 CE, Islamic forces engaged in campaigns that extended far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The Sassanid Empire in Persia and the Byzantine-controlled Levant, both long-standing regional powers, became the arenas for some of the most consequential military and cultural exchanges in early Islamic history. The Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, fought against Byzantine forces in Syria, was a decisive engagement that demonstrated both the strategic acumen of Muslim commanders and the organizational capabilities of the Islamic State. Despite facing armies far larger and better equipped, Muslim forces leveraged mobility, knowledge of terrain, and disciplined coordination to achieve victory. The success at Yarmouk effectively opened the Levant to Islamic governance and marked a turning point in the decline of Byzantine influence in the region. Simultaneously, in Persia, Muslim armies faced the formidable Sassanid Empire, which had dominated much of the Middle East for centuries. Battles such as Qadisiyah, 636 CE, and Nahawand, 642 CE, were not only military confrontations, but also encounters that tested the administrative and cultural adaptability of the Rashidun state. Through these campaigns, Muslim forces integrated newly conquered populations into the Islamic social and legal framework, respecting local customs while gradually implementing governance based on Sharia principles. By 651 CE, the Sassanid Empire had effectively fallen, signaling the collapse of one of the most enduring powers of the ancient world, and the emergence of Islam as a dominant political and cultural force across the region. Abu Bakr's successor, Umar ibn al-Khattab, is remembered for consolidating administrative structures, formalizing military organization, and institutionalizing mechanisms for governance. Umar established provinces with appointed governors, standardized tax collection, and ensured the equitable distribution of resources. He codified the practice of public consultation, shura, and decision-making, reinforcing the principle that governance was accountable to both the community and divine guidance. His policies laid the foundation for a sustainable empire, balancing rapid expansion with practical governance, social welfare, and ethical oversight. Following Umar's assassination in 644 CE, Uthman ibn Affan became the third caliph, r. 644 to 656 CE. His tenure was marked by both internal tension and significant cultural consolidation. Uthman oversaw the compilation of the Quran into a standardized text, a critical step in preserving the religious integrity of Islam and ensuring consistency across the rapidly expanding empire. While this act reinforced religious cohesion, Uthman's south appointment of close relatives to key administrative positions and perceived favoritism toward the Umayyad clan generated discontent among various factions. These tensions foreshadowed future internal conflicts, illustrating the delicate balance between political authority, social equity, and communal consensus in early Islamic governance. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad, became the fourth caliph in 656 CE. His ascension, however, coincided with a period of profound division within the Ummah, ultimately culminating in the First Fitna, the first major civil war in Islamic history. Ali's supporters emphasized legitimacy based on proximity to Muhammad, ethical governance, and the continuation of his vision, while opponents challenged his authority, citing grievances over Uthman's administration and the broader question of succession. Key confrontations, such as the Battle of the Camel, 656 CE, and the Battle of Siffin, 657 CE, highlighted the complexity of governance, the interplay of tribal loyalties, and the challenges of reconciling religious ideals with political realities. During this tumultuous period, Islam's principles were both tested and reaffirmed. The Rashidun Caliphate demonstrated that faith could serve as a unifying force even amidst internal strife, and that adherence to ethical guidelines was essential in maintaining legitimacy. Civil disputes prompted the development of legal reasoning, ijtihad, and administrative mechanisms designed to preserve social cohesion, manage conflict, and ensure justice. These innovations, forged under duress, became enduring components of Islamic governance and jurisprudence. The Rashidun period was also marked by significant social, economic, and cultural transformations. The institution of zakat became a central pillar of state policy, funding public welfare, supporting orphans and the poor, and promoting economic equity. Trade networks expanded as Islamic rule spread across Arabia, the Levant, and Persia, integrating diverse economies and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Arabic emerged as the lingua franca of administration, religion, and commerce, further unifying the multicultural empire and promoting a shared identity among disparate populations. Religious practice during this period was closely intertwined with governance. The establishment of mosques as both spiritual and civic centers reinforced communal cohesion, education, and consultation. Islamic jurisprudence began to take shape, deriving principles from the Quran and the Hadith, guiding both personal conduct and statecraft. Leadership was conceived not merely as political authority, but as a moral and ethical responsibility, accountable to God and the Ummah. This vision of governance, combining spirituality, law, and administration, distinguished the Rashidun Caliphate from contemporary empires and laid the foundations for subsequent Islamic civilizations. By 661 CE, the assassination of Ali marked the end of the Rashidun Caliphate and the beginning of the Umayyad era. Yet, the achievements of this period were profound. In less than 3 decades, Islam had evolved from a regional religious movement into a formidable political, cultural, and social force. The Arabian Peninsula had been unified under a coherent legal and ethical framework, and the boundaries of Islamic influence had expanded to include territories previously dominated by the Byzantine and Sassanid empires. The principles established during this period, ethical governance, social justice, military organization, legal reasoning, and religious cohesion, would resonate throughout Islamic history and continue to shape the civilization for centuries. Micro-nuances of the Rashidun period reveal a sophisticated understanding of governance and society. Military campaigns were planned with attention to logistics, terrain, and intelligence, reflecting advanced strategic thought. Governance combined local autonomy with central oversight, balancing tribal traditions with the need for legal and ethical consistency. Social welfare was institutionalized through zakat, the appointment of administrators, and support for marginalized populations. Religious, legal, and civic practices were harmonized to create a cohesive community, demonstrating that the principles of Islam were as much about practical governance as spiritual devotion. The Rashidun Caliphate also set enduring precedents in leadership, succession, and conflict resolution. The challenges of internal dissent, succession disputes, and civil war prompted the development of consultative processes, negotiation, and ethical frameworks for resolving disputes. Leaders were expected to balance spiritual authority with pragmatic governance, demonstrating accountability, justice, and moral integrity. These principles would continue to influence the structure and ethos of Islamic governance in subsequent centuries. In summary, the Rashidun Caliphate represented a transformative period in Islamic history. From the internal consolidation under Abu Bakr and the Ridda Wars to the strategic military campaigns of Umar, the religious codification under Uthman, and the political and ethical challenges faced by Ali, the early caliphs established a model of governance, expansion, and social cohesion that would shape the trajectory of Islam. Their achievements demonstrated the capacity of faith to unify diverse populations, provide ethical guidance for statecraft, and create a resilient community capable of withstanding both internal and external challenges. By the end of 661 CE, the foundations of a civilization that would span continents, influence cultures, and endure through centuries had been firmly established, setting the stage for the Umayyad Caliphate and the further global expansion of Islam. The assassination of Ali ibn Abi Talib in 661 CE marked the end of the Rashidun Caliphate and the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty, a period that would transform Islam from a regional religious and political movement into a sprawling imperial civilization. The Umayyads, with their capital in Damascus, inherited not only the territories consolidated under the Rashidun caliphs, but also the complex challenges of governing a diverse and rapidly expanding empire. Their rule would define the political, cultural, and administrative contours of the Islamic world, extending from the Atlantic coast of North Africa to the Indus River in the east, integrating a wide array of peoples, languages, and traditions under a single Islamic polity. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the first Umayyad caliph, rose to power following the turmoil of the First Fitna, the civil war that had erupted during Ali's caliphate. He established the principle of dynastic succession, signaling a shift from the elective model of the Rashidun caliphs to a hereditary monarchy. While this transition provoked dissent among segments of the Muslim community, the Umayyads brought a level of administrative stability and centralized authority that facilitated both internal governance and imperial expansion. Muawiyah was adept at balancing the interests of Arab tribes, former Byzantine officials, and newly integrated populations, ensuring loyalty while consolidating Damascus as the political and cultural heart of the empire. The Umayyad period was characterized by an unprecedented wave of military expansion. In the west, North Africa was gradually brought under Islamic control, culminating in the conquest of the Maghreb and the establishment of strongholds such as Kairouan in present-day Tunisia. Muslim forces crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 711 CE under the leadership of Tariq ibn Ziyad, initiating the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. By 718 CE, most of modern Spain and Portugal had been incorporated into the Umayyad realm, marking the westernmost expansion of Islamic civilization and creating a lasting legacy in architecture, science, and culture that would influence Europe for centuries. In the east, Umayyad armies pressed into Central Asia, confronting the remnants of the Sassanid Empire, local Persian dynasties, and nomadic Turkic tribes. Key victories at the battles of Nihawand, already begun during the Rashidun era but consolidated under the Umayyads, and Talas, 751 CE, slightly later, facilitated the incorporation of vast territories into the Islamic world. These campaigns were not merely military conquests. They involved the integration of diverse populations, the establishment of administrative systems, and the introduction of Islamic jurisprudence and cultural practices. The Umayyads demonstrated an acute understanding of governance, combining local autonomy with imperial oversight, ensuring the loyalty of conquered peoples while fostering the spread of Islam through both spiritual and social means. Administrative reforms under the Umayyads were critical to the cohesion of their vast empire. Arabic was established as the official language of administration, standardizing governance across diverse regions and facilitating communication, taxation, and legal processes. The creation of a bureaucratic apparatus, modeled in part on Byzantine and Sassanid precedents, allowed for efficient collection of taxes, management of resources, and oversight of provincial governors. Coinage was standardized, roads and infrastructure were maintained, and cities such as Damascus, Cordoba, and Kufa became centers of learning, trade, and cultural exchange. These developments not only strengthened political control, but also promoted a shared identity rooted in the principles of Islam and Arab culture, fostering cohesion across a remarkably diverse empire. The Umayyads also made significant contributions to Islamic culture, architecture, and intellectual life. The construction of monumental mosques, such as the Great Mosque of Damascus, symbolized both religious devotion and imperial authority. Islamic art, calligraphy, and architecture flourished, blending elements from Byzantine, Sassanid, and local traditions to create a distinctive aesthetic that would influence subsequent centuries. Scholarship, while initially centered on the preservation and transmission of the Quran and Hadith, gradually expanded to include studies in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. The Umayyads understood that cultural patronage was a vital tool for consolidating authority, legitimizing rule, and integrating conquered populations into the Islamic fold. The expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate also required careful management of religious and social tensions. Non-Arab Muslims, known as Mali, were often subject to different taxation and social obligations compared to Arab Muslims, creating friction within the empire. The Umayyads attempted to balance these disparities through selective integration, legal reforms, and efforts to incorporate Mawali into the military and administrative structures. Nevertheless, social stratification and political discontent persisted, setting the stage for future upheavals, including the eventual rise of the Abbasid Caliphate. Religiously, the Umayyad period solidified key aspects of Islamic practice and identity. Friday congregational prayers were institutionalized, pilgrimage to Mecca, Hajj, was regulated and promoted as a unifying ritual, and the compilation and recitation of the Quran were standardized across the empire. Legal and ethical guidelines derived from the Quran and Hadith informed both personal conduct and governance, ensuring that Islamic principles remained central to the administration of a vast, multicultural polity. The integration of religious observance with political and social structures helped to reinforce legitimacy, unify diverse populations, and provide moral guidance for governance. The Umayyads faced ongoing challenges in maintaining control over such a vast and diverse empire. Tribal rivalries, regional autonomy, and distant frontiers required careful negotiation, strategic marriages, and the appointment of loyal governors. Military garrisons and strategic fortifications were established along the borders of the empire, both to protect against external threats and to project authority into newly conquered territories. Despite these efforts, dissatisfaction with Umayyad rule grew among various groups, particularly in Persia and Iraq, where non-Arab Muslims and Shia factions sought greater representation and recognition. These tensions would eventually culminate in the Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE, but during the Umayyad era, the empire reached its territorial zenith and established the administrative and cultural foundations that would define Islamic civilization for centuries. Economically, the Umayyad Caliphate oversaw the flourishing of trade networks that spanned Europe, Africa, and Asia. Caravans transported goods such as silk, spices, precious metals, and agricultural products across deserts and rivers, while maritime trade flourished in the Mediterranean, Red Sea, and Indian Ocean. Urban centers became hubs of commerce, attracting merchants, artisans, and scholars from diverse backgrounds. The standardization of currency and legal frameworks facilitated these economic activities, ensuring stability and fostering prosperity throughout the empire. Economic growth reinforced political stability, strengthened the military, and supported cultural and religious institutions. The Umayyad period also witnessed the codification and transmission of knowledge. Libraries and educational institutions emerged in key cities, preserving classical texts from Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian sources while integrating them into Islamic scholarship. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy were cultivated alongside religious studies, demonstrating the empire's commitment to intellectual development. The Umayyads recognized that knowledge was both a practical tool for governance and military strategy and a cultural instrument that would legitimize their rule and unify the diverse populations under their authority. By the mid-8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate had transformed Islam from a regional Arabian faith into a global civilization. The integration of new territories, peoples, and cultures was guided by a combination of military acumen, administrative innovation, religious legitimacy, and cultural patronage. Arabic language, Islamic law, and social institutions provided cohesion, while local customs and traditions were often accommodated, facilitating smoother integration. The Umayyads demonstrated that the success of an empire depended not only on conquest, but on the ability to govern, adapt, and unify diverse populations under a shared vision. Yet, the very factors that enabled expansion, centralized authority, dynastic succession, and Arab favoritism also sowed the seeds of future instability. Discontent among non-Arab Muslims, Shia factions, and marginalized groups ultimately led to revolts, signaling the limits of Umayyad authority and paving the way for the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate. Nevertheless, the achievements of the Umayyads in territorial expansion, administrative organization, cultural development, and the promotion of Islam were unparalleled for their time, establishing a legacy that would endure long after their political dominance waned. The Umayyad Caliphate's legacy extended beyond military and administrative accomplishments. It demonstrated the capacity of Islam to serve as a unifying ideology capable of integrating diverse populations, sustaining complex governance structures, and fostering cultural and intellectual flourishing. The empire's achievements in architecture, scholarship, trade, and law provided a model for subsequent Islamic civilizations and left a lasting imprint on the regions it encompassed, from Spain in the west to Central Asia in the east. In conclusion, the Umayyad Caliphate from 661 to 750 CE represented the transformation of Islam from a regional religious movement into a global civilization. Under the leadership of Muawiyah and his successors, the empire expanded across continents, institutionalized governance, promoted cultural and intellectual achievements, and solidified the principles of Islamic practice. Despite internal tensions and eventual decline, the Umayyad period established the foundations of a durable Islamic empire, demonstrating the power of faith, strategy, and governance to reshape societies on an unprecedented scale. The year 750 CE marked a profound turning point in the trajectory of the Islamic world. The Umayyad Caliphate, despite its achievements in governance, expansion, and cultural development, had faced increasing unrest due to social inequities, political favoritism, and discontent among non-Arab populations, particularly in Iraq and Persia. The culmination of these tensions gave rise to the Abbasid Revolution, spearheaded by the descendants of the Prophet's uncle Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. The Abbasid takeover, completed in 750 CE, ushered in a new era of Islamic civilization that would not only consolidate the territorial gains of the Umayyads, but also redefine the cultural, intellectual, and spiritual landscape of the Muslim world. The foundations laid during the first 140 years of Islam, from Muhammad's revelations in 610 CE through the Rashidun and Umayyad periods, provided the necessary framework for this enduring transformation. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its new capital at Baghdad, strategically situated along the Tigris River, represented a shift from Arab-centric administration to a more inclusive, cosmopolitan empire. This change reflected both the demographic realities of the expanded Muslim world and the philosophical orientation of the Abbasid leadership, which emphasized knowledge, governance, and integration over purely Arab tribal loyalty. Baghdad rapidly became a hub of intellectual and economic activity, attracting scholars, artisans, merchants, and bureaucrats from across the empire, including Persians, Arabs, Turks, and other ethnic groups who had come under Islamic rule. The city's design, with its circular walls, planned streets, and strategic waterways, symbolized both political authority and an aspiration toward order, rationality, and cosmopolitan sophistication, contrasting with the often austere tribal and desert origins of early Islam. The Abbasid period also witnessed a remarkable flourishing of science, philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and literature. Scholars in Baghdad and other centers of learning engaged in the translation of Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, integrating knowledge from pre-Islamic civilizations with Islamic principles. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, established under Caliph Harun al-Rashid and reaching its zenith under al-Mamun, r. 813 to 833 CE, became a focal point for inquiry and intellectual synthesis. Astronomers developed sophisticated instruments for celestial observation, mathematicians advanced algebra and trigonometry, and physicians refined medical texts and treatments. These achievements were rooted in the administrative, ethical, and educational structures established during the Rashidun and Umayyad periods, illustrating the continuity of Islamic governance and intellectual enterprise. Politically, the Abbasids inherited and adapted the mechanisms of governance developed by the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphs. Provinces were governed by appointed officials, tax collection was standardized, and military garrisons were strategically deployed to maintain stability along the empire's frontiers. While the Abbasids moved away from a purely Arab-centered model, they retained many of the administrative and legal precedents established by their predecessors, demonstrating the enduring relevance of early Islamic governance. At the same time, the Abbasid period encouraged cultural integration, offering opportunities for non-Arab Muslims, Mali, to rise within the bureaucracy, military, and scholarly circles, a notable evolution from the social hierarchies of the Umayyad era. The spiritual and religious dimensions of Islam continued to evolve in this period, building upon the foundations laid during Muhammad's lifetime and solidified by the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphs. The standardization of Quranic text under Uthman, the codification of Hadith literature, and the development of Sharia as a comprehensive legal and ethical framework ensured that Islam remained a cohesive and guiding force across the empire. Religious scholarship flourished, producing prominent theologians, jurists, and philosophers who addressed questions of ethics, governance, and human conduct. These intellectual traditions provided continuity with the early teachings of Muhammad, emphasizing submission to Allah while integrating practical considerations for governance, trade, and social organization. Economically, the Abbasid era built upon the networks established under the Umayyads, expanding trade routes that spanned from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean and from sub-Saharan Africa to Central Asia. Cities such as Basra, Cairo, Cordoba, and Samarkand became centers of commerce and cultural exchange, linking distant regions through the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Coinage was standardized, markets regulated, and trade facilitated by the application of Sharia principles regarding contracts, honesty, and social responsibility. The economic prosperity of the empire not only funded monumental architectural projects, educational institutions, and administrative infrastructure, but also fostered social mobility and cultural integration, further solidifying the unity of a diverse Muslim civilization. The cultural legacy of the early Islamic state, extending through the Abbasid period, illustrates the profound impact of the rise of Islam on global history. Literature, poetry, and storytelling flourished, blending pre-Islamic Arabian traditions with influences from Persia, India, and Greece. Historiography, biographical writing, and the preservation of oral traditions allowed the achievements of previous generations to be documented, studied, and emulated. Art and architecture reflected both aesthetic innovation and the ethical principles of Islam, emphasizing geometric patterns, calligraphy, and design that embodied spiritual as well as practical functions. These cultural advancements, rooted in the ethical, legal, and administrative foundations established during Muhammad's lifetime and the Rashidun and Umayyad periods, exemplified the integration of faith, governance, and creativity. The rise of Islam also had a transformative impact on military organization, diplomacy, and international relations. The conquests initiated during the Rashidun and Umayyad periods had expanded the empire's borders, and the Abbasids inherited the task of defending, administering, and integrating these territories. Military strategy, fortifications, and garrisons were combined with diplomatic alliances, trade agreements, and cultural exchange to maintain stability. Tribes, cities, and regions that had previously been independent or under foreign dominion were integrated into a broader political and cultural framework, demonstrating that the expansion of Islam was not merely a series of military campaigns, but a complex process of governance, negotiation, and social integration. Socially, the rise of Islam had reshaped norms, values, and institutions. The ethical and legal frameworks established under Muhammad, solidified under the Rashidun, and expanded under the Umayyads and Abbasids addressed issues of justice, equity, and communal responsibility. Zakat, or almsgiving, became an institutionalized form of social welfare, supporting the poor, widows, orphans, and travelers. Marriage, inheritance, and commercial contracts were regulated according to Sharia, providing legal clarity and social stability. These measures, while rooted in religious principles, had practical implications for the governance of diverse and rapidly expanding populations, ensuring cohesion and legitimacy across vast territories. The intellectual and spiritual vitality of Islam during and after the Umayyad period underscored the enduring power of the faith's core principles. The idea that a revelation in a desert cave could inspire a civilization capable of uniting disparate tribes, integrating conquered peoples, and fostering an enduring cultural and scientific renaissance illustrates the profound resonance of Islam as both a spiritual and social system. Scholars, theologians, poets, scientists, and administrators built upon the foundations of ethical governance, social cohesion, and moral accountability established in the early centuries, ensuring that the rise of Islam was not merely a historical episode but an enduring trajectory with global significance. Even as political power shifted, the legacy of the early Islamic conquests, governance, and social innovation continued to influence subsequent empires and civilizations. The Abbasids, while distinct from the Rashidun and Umayyads, relied upon the administrative systems, legal principles, and military organization developed during those earlier periods. The integration of diverse populations, standardization of language and law, and promotion of trade and scholarship were not innovations of the Abbasids alone, but extensions and refinements of strategies that had been implemented during the formative years of Islam. This continuity demonstrates that the rise of Islam was not the result of isolated events, but a cumulative process of leadership, organization, ethical governance, and cultural engagement. The transformations initiated during the rise of Islam also reshaped the global landscape in enduring ways. Political borders were redefined, trade networks extended across continents, and knowledge systems were integrated across civilizations. The cultural and scientific achievements of the Abbasid period, including mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, had roots in the early consolidation of Arabia and subsequent expansion under the Rashidun and Umayyads, illustrating a continuity of intellectual and cultural development. Islamic law, governance, and social institutions influenced regions as diverse as North Africa, Spain, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent, leaving a legacy that persisted long after the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate. By the end of the 8th century, the rise of Islam had transformed the Arabian Peninsula and the surrounding regions from a fragmented collection of tribes into a unified civilization with a coherent political, social, and ethical framework. What began as a series of revelations to a single individual in 610 CE had evolved into a multifaceted empire capable of influencing politics, culture, science, and trade across continents. The early caliphs, the Umayyads, and the Abbasids collectively demonstrated that faith, governance, and knowledge could interact to produce a society capable of both expansion and internal cohesion. The principles of justice, social welfare, and ethical conduct enshrined in Islamic law became guiding forces for generations of Muslims, shaping the moral and political landscape of the empire and beyond. The legacy of the rise of Islam is not only historical but conceptual. It exemplifies the capacity of ideas to unify disparate peoples, create enduring institutions, and foster innovation across multiple domains of human endeavor. The integration of faith with practical governance, economic management, military strategy, and cultural patronage created a model of civilization that influenced not only the Islamic world, but also global history. From architecture and literature to law and scholarship, the innovations of early Islamic society reverberated through subsequent centuries, impacting regions far beyond the original territories of conquest. Ultimately, the rise of Islam illustrates a fundamental principle of human history, that transformative ideas, rooted in moral and ethical vision, can alter the course of societies and civilizations. The revelations received by Muhammad, the leadership of the Rashidun caliphs, the expansion and administrative sophistication of the Umayyads, and the cultural and intellectual flowering of the Abbasids together represent a continuum of innovation, resilience, and vision. These developments laid the foundation for a civilization that would endure for centuries, leaving an indelible imprint on the political, cultural, and spiritual landscape of the world.